Well, holy mother of moly. We've got a right treat on our hands today, my friends, because one of the most mental and revealing video game development leaks ever has just sprung up out of nowhere, and it's a doozy. I couldn't quite believe my eyes the other day, right, when I stumbled across, unbelievably, videos never intended for public consumption that straight up, unabashedly outline 343's original yet tragically unrealized plans for Halo Infinite, or as it was known in this very early stage, Project Olympus. And guess what? These two leaked videos have aged like absolute fucking milk. Milk left out in the hot sun for the last 5 years. That's how disastrously excruciating this is to watch back.
I think we're on the road to success for sure.
What struck me most was a kind of uncomfortable sense of patheticness and secondhand embarrassment, because every single thing they say, every promise they make, and every assurance they make to themselves, we know in hindsight will inevitably blow up in their faces. These are videos intended to generate morale and internal excitement for a game we now know had a disastrous development, that promised to not repeat mistakes that would instead be surpassed, and to reboot a series that they then left in a worse position than ever. Many of the people saying these things and making these decisions wouldn't see the game through to its launch, and pretty much every example they claim will make the game great is nowhere to be seen in the final product. I can't emphasize enough how insane it is for this to be out in the wild. Like, we simply do not get to see this side to game development, and nor should we. But this incredible insight just so happens to be for a game that had one of the most expensive, disastrous, and harmful developments ever. So all in all, these videos, which total around 30 minutes, had me pulling this face for that entire length of time, with a whole lot of this one thrown in too. Followed in kind by this face once the horribly depressing, unprophetic cringe fest was finally over. The whole thing is like a car crash you can't look away from. One where the whole time the driver kept telling you he's crashed his last 2 cars, but there's no way he crashes this one. He's learned from his mistakes, so this is going to be the safest and smoothest road trip ever. But anyway, let's keep you lot in suspense no longer, and prevent this video going on any longer because I can barely be arsed making it, and actually discuss what these delightful videos have to say, and what's new to learn from them about the hellish production of one Halo Infinite. Although, quick side note before we dig in, if you're unfamiliar at all with the development hell of Halo Infinite, I recommend watching my full critique to familiarise yourself with exactly how the ambitious plans presented in these videos fell, for lack of better words, to absolute shit. Cool, cheers, so. From what I can comprehend, these are basically internal videos outlining the vision and scope of a game 343 saw as a rebooted revolution for the series, seemingly as a pitch to Xbox to secure the enormous funding they could later put to waste. The first of these is dated February 2017 and the other August of the same year, so together roughly around a year and a half after Halo 5 and a good 4.5 years before the actual eventual release of Infinite. So starting chronologically in February, well, they simply say so much without saying anything.
I feel like any creative person worth their salt wants to make something great.
Their words ring hollow and empty as they discuss their intentions for Project Olympus in the most corporate, predictable LinkedIn fashion. To their credit, the overwhelming sentiment is that they did really listen to feedback about the honking previous 2 games, and I think they did do a good job at identifying and acknowledging some areas in which they went horrifically wrong previously, but these assurances don't mean anything because, sure, Infinite did a good job at fixing some of the problems with 4 and 5, only to create a whole host of far more devastating issues of its own. On paper, a lot of what they say here sounds really good. If I was in 2017, I think I would be excited by the direction they were headed. I was excited based on what they did eventually show off, but I'm sat here for better or realistically worse in the year of our Lord 2025, where sadly I know what's to come for Halo and I know all of this positive thinking was for naught. It just reaffirms what I found so frustrating about Infinite. The game they wanted to make is clearly far more in tune with the game I wanted. They were so close to getting it right at last, only to end up further away than ever, when the game game itself would become a shell of what they once envisioned here. The optimism they have for a fresh start, which would inevitably soon be crushed, is utterly depressing. Or maybe it was already going arse over tit from this early on, and I'm falling for the corporate spin doctor nonsense, who knows. But like I said, I'd bet that most of the leadership talking here about how amazing Olympus will be don't have anything to do with Halo anymore anyway. So mostly this video is them acting like they're making some groundbreaking rediscovery of the core themes of Halo that everyone else already knew for 15 years, as if they themselves weren't the ones that completely misunderstood and then butchered them to begin with. But no matter what happened before, saying the right things is still at the end of the day saying the right things. So at least the positive aspects of Infinite, the albeit desperate and ironic return to its roots, are clearly defined here. It's just in actually executing these apparent right things that they would get it horribly, horribly wrong. So, video 2, and this is where we get into the real meat and potatoes, the main event. It starts off with a pretty similar sentiment talking about why they opted to reboot, which is cool, and again they of course discuss why that's great, but naturally don't acknowledge what happens if your reboot fails, because you're fucked.
There is no better way to clean the slate than a reboot.
By rebooting, taking things back, lets us return to really the fundamental things that made Halo special.
But what are you going to do now? You messed it up. Reboot the reboot? Infinite simply had to be a success, and the failure to make it so is unforgivable and unreconcilable. That's the gamble of rebooting like this. But if you cleaned the slate and fail, you're left with an empty slate, which is why I guess you just panic and backtrack and desperately remake what worked before, because you've got nothing else left. But yeah, this video is just a lot more unrealized ambitions. Fun. There's talk aplenty of broad, expansive campaigns, feelings of mystery and awe, stories that evolve and grow over time, a successful, content-rich live service. None of it happened. Oh, but then you experience emotional whiplash like never before, as 1 minute I'm sat, aghast and miserable, and then David fucking Cross, of all people, pops up for a few seconds to talk about Halo for no reason at all.
Halo was the first game that had LAN parties, was it not?
This here made me laugh harder than I have for a while. Like, what? How? But most importantly, why?
Are you crazy?
Another of the devs that seemingly, but for legal reasons we don't know, got fired before launch, continues on to talk about the possible switch to Unreal, which is really interesting. This being a decision they decided against for Infinite, but obviously reneged on following the total failure of Slipspace.
I decided that the most important thing that we could do was investigate, could we make a better game in Unreal?
The level of insight to development meetings and processes here is unparalleled, and it shows how serious they were about ditching the code they had and starting completely anew in Epic's engine. Though ultimately they regrettably conclude that the majority of the studio would prefer to stick with what they know for the benefit of the feel and scope of Halo.
We asked for a vote of where people stood. The result of that vote was about 85% roughly to stay in our engine.
So this is fascinating because, as we know, one of the largest causes of Infinite's unfortunate mediocrity is the tech bankruptcy of their engine. So why did they vote to keep it? Well, I don't know, obviously, but I'd hazard a guess that it's because they were promised and believed they could pull off a shiny new Slipspace engine that would magically solve all their issues by maintaining the positives of Blam while evolving it into something more manageable and maintainable. That's my assumption anyway, because then of course the Slipspace branding they so proudly showed off at E3 and boast about here was never heard from again after its one and only appearance at that initial reveal. So their apparent failure in achieving this idealized version of Blam basically sabotaged Infinite when it became more difficult to work with than ever, eventually leading to the inevitable retreat to Unreal after all. They then talk about multiplayer while confirming it was intended to launch way before the campaign, not just a month earlier as it came to be. Fall 2019 for the multiplayer and Fall 2020 for the campaign, though it seems they instead fell flat on their faces. Also interesting, they still had Warzone and its accompanying Rex at some point, so maybe the game wasn't always free to play and at some stage still had Halo 5's egregious FIFA packs. And I know these screenshots are only concepts, but it's fun to see the suggestion of campaign DLC that obviously never came to be. Honestly, I'm running out of different ways to phrase that didn't end up happening, because there is just so much stuff left by the wayside with Infinite, and more so than ever with these new videos coming to light. And maybe I'm also seeing here why that multiplayer was delayed, because they appeared to be talking about putting hero shooter elements in my Halo. The cosmetics they show are exactly as they appear at launch, so this shit must have just been heavily rebooted. Not sure how the launch cosmetics were so lacking though, when they had all this armor over 4 years before release. They really had no idea what they were doing with the live service, did they? They also had a progression system, which was cancelled before launch, greater customization, which was cancelled, and story elements in multiplayer, which was, you guessed it, later cancelled. With this multiplayer more so than the campaign, you can really see why it was destined to fail. Trying to reinvent the formula by cowardly copying what was popular in 2017 and completely misunderstanding how intense live services were about to become was a death sentence. This here does not sell me on their vision of the time, whereas with the campaign, at least they were trying to head in the right direction, and they really did in so many ways before screwing up in so many others, and that there just speaks to the root of my whole fascination and frustration with this ridiculous game. This section does, however, showcase the blinkers they have towards anything but CE. Their boner for that game has driven the direction of the studio for the last decade, as they crudely imitate the magic of that game. I say it in all my videos, but stop condensing the series into its most reminiscent and basic imagery. It's crucial to have it, sure, but by doing so, you made your Infinite game match the scope and variety of a fraction of what came before. They also talk more about the story's intended open and flexible structure, with the player able to complete certain missions in any order, and honestly it's a shame this was cut, because it certainly can't have gone any worse than the banal linearity we ended up with.
But we have these subplots and these submissions directly connected to the main story, but it has its whole deep backstory in and of itself. They're still very first-class citizens, they have all the elements of a critical path mission, but they are opt-in.
Tim Longo here describes a very different opening to the campaign, yet with some familiar elements.
The game opens on this squad of Marines. They are going to some coordinates, and they're going to get the package. And they come around a corner, and at the end of the hallway, they see this device. Once they get close enough, sentinels erupt from the rooms, ripping the Marines to shreds and cutting them down. But they did already activate that device, and as you can see, Chief is within the device in some sort of stasis or cryo. He's also introduced to a new Cortana AI in the process. Her arc will be this clean slate, fresh perspective that is being built up over time.
This is interesting because while not identical to the final product, which is to be expected as things chop and change, a lot of the key story elements are in place here, which at least indicates to me that what was slapped together last minute was probably just a Frankenstein's monster of a few of these different opt-in story branches they discussed. From the sound of things, Cortana's whole story was supposed to be contained entirely to one of these optional branches, which I think is quite cool.
Giving Cortana her own deep narrative in one of these ribs that is opt-in allows the player to feel ownership over that journey, and it brings you down all of the twists and turns and eventually ends in her redemption and her sacrifice and how you got to that point.
You could choose which story beats you wanted to follow, and each aspect, while half-baked in the final game with the remaining uncut content crudely mishmashed together, could have had more time to shine here. There could have been an entire self-contained story for the Endless, for example, or the Banished, or the UNSC, all linked together, then culminating in a grand climactic ending. Obviously, you run the risk of having these disparate stories feeling disconnected and irrelevant to each other, but they don't have to be if they were all leading towards something, which they surely would have been. Basically, it just sounds like Outer Wilds to me, and a Halo Ring version of that with shooting would honestly be my dream. So again, on paper, I like a lot of what they're suggesting here. Though of course I have to remind myself the writing itself would have likely been far too pants to make any of this work as well as I'm imagining it, so at the end of the day, there's no use crying over spilled milk, or in this case, milk that's been left out in the hot sun for 5 long years. But as one final insult, as if the game I called the most ironic of all time couldn't be any more so, this second video is titled, of all things, The Promise. This All of this is what they wanted to promise to themselves, what they promised to deliver to fans, and ironically, none of their promises came true. Years later, these accursed videos are dug up out of nowhere for the whole world to see their failures, and it's just the saddest, most pathetic thing ever. I'm done. Just like the infinite promises of Infinite, I too am left broken by 343.
I think we're on the road to success for sure.
It'll be all the smart choices we made along the way that come together into something really awesome.
It's really solidifying our ability to be a full service. You don't just make content and walk away from it.
We want it to feel like it's this continuous story that kind of grows and evolves over time.
I don't have to wait 3 years between experiences anymore.
Even if you have this really compelling idea of a story, if you don't execute on it well, I'm, as a player, not going to care about it.
Fix it, right the ship, or we're just going to keep declining.
It's multiplayer, it's campaign, it's story, it's everything. I want to bring the joy back to Halo.
I want to put the hungry back in Halo.
I want to make a game that feels like a phenomenon.
I think we're on the road to success for sure.
Don't make a girl a promise if you know you can't keep it.
God, that was overly dramatic, wasn't it? Grow up, mate, it's not that deep. But nah, I didn't even want to talk about this fucking game anymore. I am sick of it. That last video was supposed to be a final release of the thoughts I had after making my critique, so that I could never think about it again and finally be at peace. But right when I think I'm out, they have to drag me back in. Also, quite annoyed these leaked now because I'd have loved to have this as a resource when making that original video. I wanted it to be the ultimate retrospective of Infinite, and it's instantly outdated. Fucking 343 still haunting me from the grave. So now I hope and pray that I can be free, and this video will be the last I ever upload about Halo goddamn fucking Infinite, the most ironically named and disastrously realized game of all time. But at least those videos were an unexpected treat, a rare peek behind the curtain that can at least help to prove that defining point about the game truer than ever. More videos are coming as and when, though they won't be Halo. I love you all, like and subscribe, see you in a bit.